English in Politics and Society. Political activities, media. A. State ruling. 1. Political viewpoint, ideology.
Ideologies. Ideologies. Political thought. Political thought. Political solution. Political solution. Political conformity. Political conformity. Differentiated views of politics. Differentiated views of politics. Private and public issues. Private and public issues. With a normative basis. With a normative basis. Fairly representative examples. Fairly representative examples. Kingship. Kingship. Human rights. Human rights. Feminist perspective. Feminist perspective. Unethical. Unethical. Unnatural. Unnatural. Utopian. Utopian. Utopian thinking. Utopian thinking. Authoritarian. Authoritarian. Promoting one's own political views among people. Promoting one's own political views among people. Political science. Political science.
2. Activities, pathways.
The activities of the government. The activities of the government. Party line. Party line. Way a country is governed. Way a country is governed. Totalitarian. Totalitarian. Maintain political power within government. Maintain political power within government. Negotiation with other political subjects. Negotiation with other political subjects. Making laws. Making laws. Competitive activities. Competitive activities. The process for making official government decisions. The process for making official government decisions. Distribution of status or resources. Distribution of status or resources.
3. Innovation, improvement.
Several important political innovations. Several important political innovations. Progressive. Progressive. Welfare state. Welfare state. Expedite. Expedite. Ameliorate. Ameliorate. Equality. Equality. Extending and limiting freedoms. Extending and limiting freedoms. Necessary first step toward political regeneration. Necessary first step toward political regeneration.
4. Pacification, rectification.
Assimilating. Assimilating. Seduce. Seduce. Malleability. Malleability. Impose. Impose. Intimidate. Intimidate. Deracinated. Deracinated. Reactionary. Reactionary. Pacification. Pacification. Transfer of population. Transfer of population. Rectification of frontiers. Rectification of frontiers. Elimination of unreliable elements. Elimination of unreliable elements. Avoid a nationalistic reaction. Avoid a nationalistic reaction. Russian purges and deportations. Russian purges and deportations. Laying the foundations of a cooperative and unified Europe. Laying the foundations of a cooperative and unified Europe. Achieving a radical transformation. Achieving a radical transformation. Use of power. Use of power. An exercise of power. An exercise of power. Use the military to suppress. Use the military to suppress. Exercising internal and external force. exercising internal and external force.
5. Offical, formality, legal.
Official. Official. Official name. Official name. Legal. Legal. To legalize. To legalize. Rightful. Rightful. Regular. Regular. Permission. Permission. Approved. Approved. License. License. Take effect. Take effect. Render inoperative. Render inoperative. Militate against. Militate against. Biometric enrollment. Biometric enrollment.
6. Micropolitics.
Political participation. Political participation. Activism. Activism. Civil disobedience. Civil disobedience. Dissatisfaction with the regime. Dissatisfaction with the regime. Prosperous period. Prosperous period. Boycott. Boycott. Protest. Protest. Demonstration. Demonstration. Strike. Strike. Picketing. Picketing. Petition. Petition. Tax resistance. Tax resistance.
7. Key principles of good governance.
Honesty. Honesty. Transparency. Transparency. Responsiveness. Responsiveness. Management independent of governing bodies. Management independent of governing bodies. Rule of law. Rule of law. Effectiveness and efficiency. Effectiveness and efficiency. Fairness. Fairness. Just. Justice and governance. Just. Justice and governance. Accountability. Accountability.
B. Political dysfunction.
Do not square with the professed aims of political parties. Do not square with the professed aims of political parties. Anarchy. Anarchy. The present political chaos. The present political chaos. Nepotism. Nepotism. Political trick. Political trick. Cronyism. Cronyism. Political patronage. Political patronage. Political corruption is the use of powers for illegitimate private gain. Political corruption is the use of powers for illegitimate private gain. Clientelism. Clientelism. Group benefits. Group benefits. Earmarking. Earmarking. Pork barreling. Pork barreling. Slush funds. Slush funds. Bribery. Bribery. Spoil systems. Spoil systems. Kleptocracy. Kleptocracy. Rule of thieves. Rule of thieves. Patrimonialism. Patrimonialism. Internal fighting. Internal fighting. Power struggle. Power struggle. Power corruption. Power corruption. Abuse of power. Abuse of power. Circumvent the law. Circumvent the law. Unconstitutional. Unconstitutional.
C. Effects of corruption.
Corruption affects us all. It threatens sustainable economic development, ethical values, and justice. It destabilizes our society and endangers the rule of law. It undermines the institutions and values of our democracy. But because public policies and public resources are largely beneficial to poor people, it is they who suffer the harmful effects of corruption most grievously. To be dependent on the government for housing, healthcare, education, security, and welfare makes the poor most vulnerable to corruption since it stalls service delivery. Delays in infrastructure development, poor building quality, and layers of additional costs are all consequences of corruption. Many acts of corruption deprive our citizens of their constitutional and their human rights. Undermining the Sustainable Development Goals. Undermining the Sustainable Development Goals. Economic loss and inefficiency. Economic loss and inefficiency. Poverty and inequality. Poverty and inequality. Personal loss, intimidation, and inconvenience. Personal loss, intimidation, and inconvenience. Public and private sector dysfunctionality. Public and private sector dysfunctionality. Failures in infrastructure. Failures in infrastructure. Rigged economic and political systems. Rigged economic and political systems. Impunity and partial justice. Impunity and partial justice. Rising illiberal populism. Rising illiberal populism. Organized crime and terrorism. Organized crime and terrorism. Diminished state capacity. Diminished state capacity. Increasing polarization and unrest. Increasing polarization and unrest. Climate change and damage to biodiversity. Climate change and damage to biodiversity. Human rights violations. Human rights violations. Armed conflict and atrocity crimes. Armed conflict and atrocity crimes. Public frustration and cynicism. Public frustration and cynicism.
D. Social media.
Public speaking. Public speaking. Press. Press. Speeches. Speeches. Dialogues. Dialogues. Make contact with. Make contact with. Be subject to. Be subject to. Give rise to. Give rise to. Play a leading part in. Play a leading part in. Make itself felt. Make itself felt. The fact that. The fact that. By dint of. By dint of. In view of. In view of. In the interests of. In the interests of. Exhibit a tendency to. Exhibit a tendency to. Tend. Tend. Inevitably. Inevitably. Veritable. Veritable. Extraneous. Extraneous. With respect to. With respect to. Having regard to. Having regard to. Prove unacceptable. Prove unacceptable. Uncharitable attitude. Uncharitable attitude. Unforgettable. Unforgettable. Inevitable. Inevitable. Inexorable. Inexorable.
E. Press language. 1. Literary style.
Pretentious diction. Pretentious diction. Mixed metaphors. Mixed metaphors. Visual image. Visual image. Inflated style. Inflated style. Dress up simple statements. Dress up simple statements. Give an air of scientific impartiality. Give an air of scientific impartiality. Felt impelled to write it. Felt impelled to write it. The debasement of language. The debasement of language. The decay of language. The decay of language. A lifeless, imitative style. A lifeless, imitative style. group themselves automatically into the familiar dreary pattern. Group themselves automatically into the familiar dreary pattern. Bespeak canker and atrophy of the soul. Bespeak canker and atrophy of the soul. Not a very gross one. Not a very gross one. Making further nonsense. Making further nonsense. Increase the general vagueness. Increase the general vagueness. Political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question, begging and sheer cloudy vagueness. Political language has to consist largely of euphemism, question, begging and sheer cloudy vagueness. Saying what it does not imply. Saying what it does not imply. Correct grammar and syntax. Correct grammar and syntax. Obsolete words and turns of speech. Obsolete words and turns of speech. That language merely reflects existing social conditions. That language merely reflects existing social conditions. All issues are political issues. All issues are political issues. Political language. Political language. Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy. Dignify the sordid processes of international politics. Dignify the sordid processes of international politics. This invasion of one's mind by ready-made phrases, lay the foundations, achieve a radical transformation, can only be prevented if one is constantly on guard against them, and every such phrase anesthetizes a portion of one's brain.
2. Desire, prediction, hypothesis, goal.
Predict. Predict. On the hypothesis that. On the hypothesis that. An unjustifiable assumption. An unjustifiable assumption. A not unjustifiable assumption. A not unjustifiable assumption. A development to be expected in the near future. A development to be expected in the near future. Dealing with conditions. Dealing with conditions. Greatly to be desired. Greatly to be desired. Something not desirable. Something not desirable. Leaves much to be desired. Leaves much to be desired. Cannot be left out of account. Cannot be left out of account. But that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. But that a considerable element of the unpredictable must invariably be taken into account. A consideration which we should do well to bear in mind. A consideration which we should do well to bear in mind. Biased judgments. Biased judgments. Objective consideration. Objective consideration. Deserving of serious consideration. Deserving of serious consideration. Brought to a satisfactory conclusion. Brought to a satisfactory conclusion. Give grounds for. Give grounds for. Have the effect of. Have the effect of. Serve the purpose of. Serve the purpose of. Would serve no good purpose. Would serve no good purpose.
3. Long, standing event.
Triumphant. Triumphant. Glorifying war. Glorifying war. Takes on an archaic color. Takes on an archaic color. Age-old. Age-old. Realm. Realm. Throne. Throne. Chariot. Chariot. Trident. Trident. Sword. Sword. Shield. Shield. Clarion. Clarion. Bloodstained tyranny. Bloodstained tyranny. Bestial atrocities. Bestial atrocities. Hangman. Hangman. Cannibal. Cannibal. Iron heel. Iron heel. Mailed fist. mailed fist,